Good morning, everybody. I think you can probably hear me now. Sorry about that. This is our last History in the Modern World class of the summer. Welcome, and I'm glad you guys are here. I hope you've enjoyed learning about history and learning about how the world works a little bit. Good morning to Evan and Vivian and Leah and Cian and Willow. Hi, everybody. I'm glad you are all here this morning. It's good to see all of you in the class. I hope that you've all learned some stuff about history and social studies. Today, we're going to be talking about economic systems. Now, that sounds maybe like a complicated word, complicated terms there, but it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. This is something that you might hear grown-ups talk about a lot. You may hear about it in the news. People talk about it in social media. The economy. It's kind of a big deal, and everybody's part of it. Believe it or not, you are part of the economy. So we're going to talk about it today and what that means. As always, if you have any questions or you want to share anything, write it in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. You don't need to hit the raise hand button because it doesn't do anything. So if you have any questions, just type it in the Q&A box. All right, so let's get started. All right, so today we are talking about economic systems. And step one is just to find out what that means. So you may have heard people talk about the economy. Talking about the economy of a country or area is just a way to describe people making things, selling things, buying things, and using things. So who has heard of the economy before? Who has heard this term before, or heard their parents talk about it, or maybe heard other adults talk about it, or heard about it in the news? You may have heard some of the words used to describe different types of economies. In one of our classes a few weeks ago, somebody was asking about, when we were talking about forms of government, somebody was saying, isn't communism a form of government? Isn't capitalism a form of government? Well, at the time we talked about, no, those are types of economies or economic systems. Now, this can get a little bit confusing because sometimes people will use the words that describe types of economies, and they'll use them to kind of describe types of governments. I think where that confusion comes from is that it often takes a certain type of government to have a certain type of economy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Let's see. Aubrey says no. Willow says that Willow has heard of some of these terms. Good. Leah and Cian have heard the president and people on TV use some of these terms. So that's great. Evan says that the economy equals money. Yeah, basically. Well, like we have our definition here. The economy is a term used to describe all the people that are making things, selling things, buying things, and using things. But money is a big part of that. So you are definitely right. Okay, so for example, you may remember we had in our class where we were talking about money, people like to make things. This person might have some wheat where they live, so they take the wheat and then they turn it into bread. That would be a person producing something or making something. Oh, great. Ethan says that Ethan has heard of some of these terms. Vivian has heard people on the news talk about the economy. That's great. Aubrey says, not me. Well, that's totally fine. Maybe in the future, now that we're talking about the subject, you may hear some of these terms and you'll know what they're talking about, and that'll be great. Asher says, what is a government? That's a great question. Yeah, we should probably talk about that really quickly before we get into what economies are. We do need to know what the government is. So government is basically a really simple term I don't have slides ready for this today, but I'll try to describe it so that you understand. People like to make decisions, but when you live in a group of people, it can be hard to decide who gets to make decisions for the group. So for example, let's say you and a whole group of friends want to go to the movies when you're able to go to the movies again. Every person in the group, it might be hard to decide, you know, one person wants to go see a superhero movie, somebody else wants to go see an action movie, somebody else wants to go see a comedy, and it can be tough to decide, you know, what everyone should see. So sometimes, you know, usually a group of people will pick somebody and will say, we all trust you, we think that you're good at making decisions, you are going to decide for the group. And that person might say, okay, we're going to go see this action superhero movie that's also a comedy. And everybody's like, oh, that's a great idea. Why didn't we all think of it? That is, at its simplest form, a basic government. The people of the group are choosing somebody to make decisions for the group. That's kind of like a democracy. You may have heard that term. There are, or another term for that is a republic. There are other types of governments, though, where somebody that's like strong kind of takes control of the group, whether people want them to or not. They usually use violence to do that. And then they control the decisions for everybody. And a lot of times people don't like the decisions, but they're not powerful enough to fight back. And that's usually called like a, that's called tyranny is a word for that. Having a tyrant. Yeah. If you want to learn more about this, we did a class a few weeks ago where we talked about forms of government. This is basically like the shortest description I can give to you. But it's basically the people that are in charge of making decisions for the group. In places like the United States, you often get to vote for who is going to be in charge of the group. But in other countries, the government is sort of in charge of the group and they don't let people vote. They just sort of keep control and they stop anybody from trying to change that. So that is a not so awesome form of government. Great. So with that covered, let's get back to talking about economies. So again, the economy is people making things, selling things, buying things, and using things. And if you don't take anything else away from the seminar today, that's what I want you to understand. It's just that the economy, it can sound like a complicated thing, but it's actually a lot simpler than a lot of people understand. So people, they might have, you know, like a resource, like something that they can do stuff with, like plants, like wheat. They might have wheat where they live, and they take that and they turn it into bread. Or a long time ago, people would find that they had like rocks where they live that had metal in them. And they could use this metal and turn it into swords or other metal objects. And then people, let's say one person is making bread and another person is making swords. And they say, hey, you have bread, I have swords. We should trade with each other. And one person gives the other person the bread that he made, the other person gives the sword that he made. And now they are trading things to each other. And this is called an economy. These people are, because remember the definition back here, they're making things and they're selling, buying, or using things. They're passing things back and forth, whether it's bread or swords or anything else. When people start passing things back and forth and selling them or buying them, they have an economy. And that can look like, you know, that could be where they use money. Instead of, you know, just giving each other actual physical things like bread, they could come up with like gold or silver coins or paper money, and they start passing that around instead of, you know, just bread or other things. So in modern times, people don't pass things back and forth as much as they used to. Much more often, it's like you work for a company. This person, he produces something for the company. Like this is, you know, like a car factory. So he's making car parts for the factory, and the company pays him money in the form of a paycheck that he takes home. People still do pass things back and forth. Like people might, this guy might make swords or knives in his garage as like a fun hobby, and he sells them, online for money. Or, people sell things on websites like Etsy or eBay, or people have garage sales, or there's things like Facebook Marketplace is a website where you can just, go online and say, hey, I've got this old sword sitting around, and somebody, you meet up with somebody at like a Starbucks, and, they buy your sword from you. So that's definitely still part of the economy. But the main way most people make money in modern day is they work for like a company, and they do something for the company, and the company pays them money. Now, of course, there's also people that they like work for themselves, or they have their own company, in which case they, people make things for them and they pay the people so they can sell things. So the economy can look kind of complicated just because there's lots of buying and selling and trading and things going on. Here we have, people are selling bread and swords and cars and horses, and there's factories and businesses and houses, and the economy can look really complicated just because there's so many people that are part of it, and there's so many things going on. If you think about an entire city with all the people that live there and all the things that they're selling and passing around, when you drive down the street, all of those people that you see out there, they're all involved in the economy. Everyone out there is a buyer or a seller or a user of things and money. So the economy just means all of that, all of those people. Anytime you ever used money or bought something or sold something or made something, you too were part of the economy. It's all of us. So yeah, that's the first thing I want you to know about that. Okay, so types of economies. The oldest types of economies on Earth were basically that when people pass things back and forth. The term for that is the barter system. If you were part of our money class from a few weeks ago, you might remember us talking about this. That system where one person has bread and he gives it to somebody else, and that person gives him a sword, we call that bartering. And the whole system of people doing this is the barter system, just passing things back and forth. You have something I want, I have something you want, so we trade. And people still barter to this day. If you've ever traded with your friend, like let's say your friend had some cards. I'm talking about when I was a kid. You might have like baseball cards or like Pokemon cards or something. I have a card you want, you have a card I want, we trade. Hey, we just had a barter system, and that is a form of economy. The oldest economies on Earth were this type of economy. People were farming, they were making things to keep their own family alive. People started to form villages. If somebody else in the village had a cow that made milk, and I had a big, field full of wheat, and I was baking bread, we would say, hey, let's trade. Let's come up with a system here where you bring me milk, I bring you bread. That was the oldest economy. And that kind of economy existed everywhere on Earth, whether it's America or Europe and Africa, Asia, Australia, anywhere that people were forming groups and farming, they started to have this kind of economy. Now, over time, here's some of the steps of that. So this type of economy is centered around a family or tribe, and it exists in a hunter-gatherer and nomadic society. What that means is that the people, they're mostly feeding themselves by hunting for meat and like gathering berries and other vegetables and fruit and things that are available like that. And nomad means that people just wander from place to place, maybe following animals, maybe trying to find better sources of water. So this type of society would they would hunt and they would gather for things, and their trade relied on barter. That's what we just talked about. And people, for the most part, were producing only what they needed to survive. People would try to farm, they would hunt, but they didn't have a lot of extra stuff left over. A surplus, which is like extra stuff left over, was rare. But this form of economy usually evolved to form currency as like money. So eventually, like in our earlier slide there, people would move away from the barter system and they would start using money to trade with each other. So this kind of economy existed all over the place, but as technology advances and people start trading money with each other, usually this form of economy would evolve. And what would it evolve into? What we call a market economy. And a market economy is basically, there are not a lot of rules about trading things. In a market economy, and another word for this is capitalism, everybody owns their own stuff. They usually have maybe they're farming, they're producing food, they're producing things, and they start trading with other people. And the people, like their government or the people that run them, don't put a lot of control on what they do with stuff. In a pure market economy, there would be absolutely no rules about what you could produce, buy, sell, use, give away, etc. So let's say I want to make tons and tons and tons of swords and sell them to everybody in my village, and our government or our ruler is like, yeah, do whatever you want. That's a market economy. And I can sell just a few and just feed my family, or I can make and sell way more and try to, make a lot of money and like basically store up a lot of gold in my castle or whatever. Market economies are still in use to today. And in a lot of ways, they work really well. Because there aren't a lot of controls over what you can or can't do, people can really kind of work on whatever they want. If you're interested in being an actor and just traveling from town to town and like putting on shows in the street, you can do that. There's not really any rules saying you can't. If you want to build a factory and make things, you can do that. But there's something really important to understand, which is that there is not really any pure form of economy anywhere in the world. There's different types, and they're usually like a mixture of one or more. Because you may be all thinking already that, hold on, can I just go build a factory, or are there some rules about that? Well, actually there are. Can I just go perform a play on the street wherever I want, or are there some rules about that? There actually are some rules about that in most places. A market economy, characteristics means, some of the normal things that you would see in a market economy. People usually have private property, which means they own things themselves. They have freedom of choice about, buying and selling, what they want to do with their money. Their motive is self-interest, usually. What that means is that people are doing the kind of companies they're doing, they're working where they want, they're buying and selling what they want out of self-interest. It's it's what they want. It's what they think is going to be best for themselves or their families. There's competition, which means I'm going to try to sell more things in my company than you will in your company. I'm going to try to make more money than you. Limited government means that the government, or the people that are in charge, are not going to step in very much. And then here, this picture, supply and demand, means what people buy and sell and make is usually based off of like what people need and want. So let's say our town really likes, donuts, but nobody has a donut shop in our town. If we want to go somewhere, we have to go really far away to get a donut. There might be a high demand for donuts. Like a lot of people are like, oh man, I wish I could eat a donut here in this town. Somebody might get smart and go, if I opened up a donut shop, I bet a lot of people would buy them. And anybody that wants to can open up their own donut shop. I'm making a real example here because our closest town, this was the case. People love donuts. Nobody was selling donuts. Somebody opened up a donut shop and it's very successful. That's called people have a demand for something, so people step up and supply it. That is sort of that is the core of capitalism. That's people want things, other people have the freedom to make them and sell them. Nobody is kind of controlling what kind of company you can or can't do. Now, one problem for people in this type of economy is because you can kind of do whatever you want. A lot of companies that people start fail because maybe they didn't have the right idea about what people wanted. Maybe they didn't have enough education about how to do that type of company correctly. Maybe they didn't let enough people know about their company. But that's sort of when you have the freedom to do any type of company that you want, you kind of take the risk of maybe your company doesn't do so well. That's sort of, that's the risk and reward there. So another type of economy is called a command economy. That's one of the terms for it. And this is where the people that are in charge, or the government, say, we don't really want people to be making so many decisions for themselves. We think that we as the government can do a better job deciding how things should be done, and the government will kind of just control it all, and they'll sort of take control and tell everybody what they should or shouldn't do. And here is a picture of that. So in a command economy, the government creates a central economic plan. That means the government, the people in charge, are going to decide what should be made, how much of it should be made, who's going to make it, etc. They decide, they might say like, Joe, you are going to be in charge of all the farming. Bob, you're going to be in charge of all the making of swords and things. Sally, you're going to be in charge of raising horses for people to use, or building trains, or whatever. But the government says, we can make the best decisions for you, and we're going to tell everybody what to do. Actually, more terms on this page than I actually want to explain right now. But what the main thing that you can get from this is that the government is basically deciding for everybody what they should do. Instead of people making their own choices, in this type of economy, the government is going to try to make all the choices. I think a good comparison is that it's kind of like a family. In a family with like parents and kids, the family as a whole, like the kids in the family, don't always get to make a lot of choices about what, say, the family should eat, or where the family should go on the weekend, or, etc. The parents are in charge. The parents are going to decide what we eat, where we live, what we're going to do. And they're sort of in control of the family. The parents make the money. The parents decide how much money or things to give to the children. And that works on a small scale like a family. Most people agree at this point in history that when this has been attempted on a larger scale, like a whole country, it doesn't work so well. On a small scale, somebody that's in charge can usually make good decisions for a small group. Trying to make all the decisions for a really big group gets really tough. Trying to decide for like hundreds of thousands or millions of people, like where everybody's going to work, where they're going to live, what they're going to, produce, it's really, really tough. Most people would argue it's so tough that it's never been done very well. It's been attempted at different points in history. It just never really worked out. One of the good things about capitalism is that when everybody's free to do kind of whatever they want, lots of people will come up with original new ideas. People will say, we have computers, but what if I tried to make a computer that was smaller? and they use their own money and their own time and maybe the money of their friends, and they hire some people, and they come up with something that's better and awesome, and people are willing to buy that from them. They start a company. It works. In a command economy, the people that are in charge might not ever have that idea. They say, our big bulky computers are good enough. We're going to keep on making those. And somebody's like, hey, what if we, and they're like, shh, 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 shh. No. In a command economy, the people that are in charge may not have a lot of original ideas. They may have some bad ideas or make mistakes. But when they're in charge and they get to decide everything, everybody else just kind of has to do what they say. And it doesn't work out so well. If you were in our forms of government seminar from a few weeks ago, you may remember this chart that I showed. Up at the top, totalitarianism is the form of government where the group of people that are in charge get to make all the decisions. They make every decision for every part of life. And this is kind of the type of government you have to make a command economy work. The government has to be able to be in control of everything to give people all the directions on where to live, what are you going to produce, what are you allowed to do. Or authoritarianism is where the government is in charge of some things, but still, people don't get a lot of choices themselves. Whereas a market economy or capitalism is usually like a direct democracy, or it's down here at the other end of the scale where the government doesn't have as much control over things. Now, like we said earlier, those are kind of the two ends of the scale. A pure market economy would be the government has like no control. People can do pretty much whatever they want. They can make whatever they want. They can buy and sell whatever they want. Very little control. Whereas a command economy is the other end of the scale. And other words for this are like communism. That's usually where the government is trying to make it so that like everybody gets the same amount of stuff. It's supposed to be like everybody's equal. But there's not ever really been a totally pure market economy or like a totally pure command economy. And the reason for that is that most countries and most areas have what's called a mixed economy. And that means that some things are like a market economy and some things are like a command economy. This is the United States. This is pretty much everywhere almost, that people have a lot of freedom in a lot of areas, but there's also things that the government controls. If you think about this, again, it's really tough for, like in a command economy, it's really tough for the government to control everything. People will still kind of form their own markets. They'll still form their own maybe secret markets where they're buying and selling things without the government knowing about it. So that's one way that you could have sort of a mixed economy. In a free market or capitalist economy where people have a lot of freedom to buy and sell and make things, there can still be a lot of big problems that come up, and the government usually steps in a little bit to try to control some of those things. In most capitalist or free market societies, there's like a lot of really good things. Like people are usually able to own their own cars, buy their own houses. A lot of the people in a free market economy tend to do pretty good. You know, a lot of people will have jobs. A lot of people will be able to make money and be happy, but there's problems too. Like some people will get wealthier and wealthier and do better and better, while other people are getting, poorer and poorer and not doing so good. And free market economies often haven't, been able to figure out a good way to help everybody in the country do well. When you have the freedom to sort of, do whatever you want, some people will usually do better and better, while some people that maybe don't have as much education, or maybe they've had other problems in their lives, they don't tend to do well and they get poorer and poorer. And, the government and the other people of the country often don't have a ton of good ideas about what to do about this. Another thing that can come up in free market economies is where one company starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger. This is an old cartoon somebody drew way back in the United States to show that some companies were getting really, really big. And they said this was kind of like an octopus. This is not what an octopus looks like in real life. But some of the oil companies and some of the other companies in the United States were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they were starting to kind of take over. Because again, one of the best things about a free market economy is that everybody in the economy is supposed to be able to compete. Everybody is supposed to be able to like start up their own company and like work hard. And if they work hard and they do a great job, they should do well and be able to succeed. But when one company gets like on this side, gets super powerful, they can often start doing things to make other companies fail, even when those companies are doing everything right. For example, let's say you're a giant internet bookseller like Amazon. If Amazon wanted to, let's say a new website starts up where they're selling books also. Amazon could drop their prices temporarily and sell everything really cheap until that company goes out of business, and then Amazon raises their prices up again. Oil companies and other companies in the past have done other things where they will bribe people in the government, where they will pay people in the government to change laws and make it so it's harder for other smaller companies to compete with them. Sometimes a big company will kind of make a secret agreement with a few other companies that they're all going to kind of work together to make sure that the rest of the companies can't succeed. So this has happened a lot throughout history, and a lot of laws were passed in the United States and other countries to try to stop this from happening. So again, most people love a free market economy, but they also feel that there are some problems that come up that we haven't always had good solutions for. Another problem that can come up in a free market economy is that people, when they want to make a lot of money and they want to do really well for themselves, they will maybe not always think about the big picture or what's best for everybody. And that's totally understandable, because in a free market economy, your main goal is to make money for yourself or your family or your group. So some people won't think about, say, how much they pollute or how much like trash that they create. We end up with a lot of areas have like a lot of trash or pollution because, for example, the companies that make drinks and things said that plastic bottles are like the most convenient, the cheapest to produce. But the problem with plastic is that it doesn't break down. It just sits on beaches and the ocean, and animals eat it, and it kills a lot of ocean life and animals. But the way a free market economy works is that companies are kind of free to do this, and it's kind of it's a problem. We don't really know how to balance letting people and companies do what they want to do, but also protect the environment. How do you let people have total freedom, but stop them, but keep them from hurting the environment and polluting? ISIS asks, what happens when a company does that? What does the government do? Well, a lot of times the government will pass laws saying like, maybe you're not allowed to pollute. Let's say you have like a factory that puts like a ton of smoke into the air and it makes it hard for people to breathe that live around there. The government might pass a law saying you're not allowed to make things in a way that pollutes a lot. Well, the people that usually own those companies are not happy about that because it makes it harder for them to make things. It makes it more expensive to make things. So in a lot of areas today, it's like we're trying to find a balance. How do you let people have a lot of freedom to make things and do things, but also not destroy the planet with a ton of pollution and plastic and everything else? Oh, ISIS is asking about the monopoly too. When one company is getting really powerful and they're sort of taking over all of the other companies and they're driving other companies out of business, what the government has done in the past is they will actually go in and break that company up. So there was, back in the day, a giant oil company. They made gasoline, and they made fuel for planes, and they made the type of oil that people would burn to heat their houses. And this company was getting giant, and it was basically the only big, oil company. And the government actually stepped in and broke up the company. They said, you're not allowed to be one big company anymore. We are forcing you to break into several smaller companies. And a lot of the big gas station companies that you know of today, I believe, like Exxon, if you've ever seen like an Exxon gas station, Shell, with the yellow shell, a lot of the major gasoline companies were all used to be one big company. And then the government forced it to break up into smaller companies. You'll hear about this with other companies. I think some people talk about, some people in the government and some people in our country feel that Amazon is way too big of a company. They feel that Amazon being so big makes it hard for smaller companies to compete with them. Some people have talked about maybe forcing Amazon to break up into smaller companies. You can go on Amazon.com and you can buy books or furniture or food or clothing or electronics, video games, whatever. You can buy it on that website. And the company is so big that what's good for us as people is that we can buy a lot of stuff at a really cheap price. But the thing that people get upset about is that your local stores, like maybe on the main street of your town, can't really compete with those prices. The local bookstore in my nearby town sell, in order to stay open, pay their rent, pay their employees, they have to sell books for maybe like $20. That same book on Amazon is like $10. So a lot of people feel like that makes it really hard for small companies in your town to stay open. So they say, what if we broke up Amazon into a bunch of smaller companies? Like maybe one of Amazon's companies would just be Amazon Books. They'd go back to just being sort of a bookstore. And then maybe selling electronics would have to be a different company. And some people feel like that's a good idea. Some people feel like that's not a bad idea. They say, hey, even if my local bookstore closes, it's better for me to pay less money to buy books online. Eleanor says, that picture looks like a dog, octopus, squid. Yeah, it's kind of a fun picture to communicate the idea of a giant company taking over. I don't know if this person had ever actually seen an octopus in real life. Yeah, so, and Isa says, no, I need Amazon. Yeah, I feel the same way. I love buying cheap books online. But I also have a friend that works at the local bookstore, and I really want her to keep her job, and I don't want that company to go out of business. So that's often in a market economy. These are the sort of decisions that you have to make. You have to decide, am I going to buy from the local place, even though it's more expensive, or am I going to buy things online because they're cheaper? When you buy something online, the money goes far away. It goes to like a big company somewhere else. When you buy something from a local shop, people will argue that the money sort of stays in your community. If you buy from the local bookshop, then they go and they buy something from the local restaurant, and the people in your area do better instead of sending your money out of the area. And Ethan says, the pollution is like in the Lorax. Yeah, the Dr. Seuss book. You're totally right. It's another big problem that we have to, deal with, is figuring out, how do we let companies have freedom and do things and make all the awesome stuff we use in our lives, but also not pollute the world? How do we let companies make stuff and do stuff, but not dump all of their pollution and toxic things into the streams that we get water out of? Is there a best balance between freedom and rules? ultimately, it's going to be up to all of you guys as you grow up and you get to vote and you get to help make the rules that we all live under, is that all of you are going to help us decide what is the right balance. How do we let people have a lot of freedom and a lot of choices and come up with a lot of great ideas? But how do we also protect the environment so there's not a lot of pollution, so that sea life isn't dying? It's going to be up to you guys. So I hope you enjoyed learning about different types of economic systems today. I hope the next time you hear some grown-ups talking about the economy, you know a little bit more about what they're talking about. Lastly, we've already had a few people do online tours where they are touring our school. Some people were asking about Delphian, where we deliver these online classes from. I know that some of our guys already got to do some tours with Ananya, so keep them coming. If you're interested, if you want to see our school, you can schedule a tour